So for me, it took a while to learn all the audio effects in Ableton, and a lot of them are very good. However, I did struggle to know where and why to use them. So I'm going to break these down so you know where to use them and how they can improve your music. So I post about music production regularly. So if improving your music production skills is something that you're into, please feel free to subscribe and let's get into the video. All right, so starting off with reverb, which in a nutshell is the persistence of a sound after it's produced. It's a nice addition to a sound because the sound won't stop as abruptly and it will just sound more pleasant to the listener. So a few controls to be mindful of when using reverb are the low cut and the high cut. This will stop unwanted frequencies from your reverb bleeding into other parts of your track. Just for example, the low end, like the bass and the kick. And we can also do that for the higher frequencies as well, so the reverb doesn't bleed into our drums. Next up, we have the decay time. This is how quickly the reverb will drop off. And also we have the dry wet. So how much of the reverb signal do you want to mix in with the original signal? All right, so if you've got the reverb on the channel itself, I'll use this snare roll as an example. So here's a snare roll without reverb. And here it is with reverb. Just a few things to be mindful of. I wouldn't have too much dry wet. Otherwise, the reverb can be quite intense. So I wouldn't have anything above 40%. For this, I've dropped it below 30%. And it's a similar story with the decay time as well. Too much decay time can flood the mix with unnecessary reverb. So I've pulled that back as well. Just have as much as you need. So when it comes to using reverb for a vocal, I wouldn't have the reverb on the channel itself, I'd use a return track instead. So if I've got the reverb on the channel itself, you can hear when I play the vocal, it has reverb when the audio is playing, but when it finishes, the reverb stops abruptly. But now I'll play the vocal with the reverb on the return track. You notice that the reverb doesn't stop so abruptly, it just fades out after the audio is finished, which sounds a lot smoother and it'd be much better to listen to. Just something to keep in mind for the return track, always have the reverb dry wet up to 100%. Alright, so next up we have the utility, which I personally use on every channel and the master channel as well. So I'll just run through some of the most important controls. You can switch the sound between the left and right ear. So you can do that by clicking these buttons or with the drop down. You can also play with the width of the sound as well. So if you put it down to 0%, it'll be mono, and then you can turn it all the way up as well. But 100% most of the time is just fine. So with mono, you want to switch this on for the low end and keep it on. However, for the master channel, if you've got a utility on there, you can flick between stereo and mono to see how it does sound. Sometimes you can get some sound cancellation if you have it in mono. You can EQ other sounds to make room for the ones that are getting lost in the mix. So on the master channel, I use the utility for volume automation. So what I'll do is I'll bring the volume down just before the drop, and then when the drop hits, I'll bring it back up again. For each channel, if you are doing volume automation, you want to do this on a utility rather than doing it on the mixer. Because what will happen if you change the levels later on, the automation will disappear. So you're back to square one. So using a utility for this, you don't run into this issue. All right, so next up we have the compressor. So the aim here is to quieten the loudest parts and to make the quietest parts louder. And that way it will sound a lot smoother. So first up we have the threshold. This is where we want the compression to kick in. And anything above this threshold will be compressed. As you can see with our gain reduction, the compressor is working at bringing down those loudest peaks. Next we have the attack. So the quicker it is, the quicker we reach maximum compression. And then with the release, it's how quickly the compression stops. So next up we have the ratio. This determines how much compression is applied. Just for this example, if I have a ratio of 3:1, for every 3 dB over the threshold, then 1 dB of output comes out. So basically the higher that number is, the more aggressive the compression is. So when it comes to compression, you may have heard of a soft knee and a hard knee. It took me a while to understand this. However, the higher the number is here, the more gradually the compression happens. And then if you want a hard knee, you lower this number here, and then as soon as the signal hits the threshold, the compression will happen. Also, if you open up the compressor, you'll be able to trigger the sidechain compressor. I've got the sidechain compressor on my bass, and I've got the audio from the kick. So basically when my kick hits, I want my bass to duck just so the kick is more prominent. Because the kick is quite punchy, I want a really fast attack, and with the release, I want the compression to stop as soon as the kick finishes. So by looking at my kick sample, the release needs to be about 200 milliseconds. So I hope you found that useful in regards to reverb, utilities and compression. Obviously I didn't cover every single audio effect in this video, so I will be doing this in 2 or 3 parts just so I cover everything. If there's a particular audio effect that you want me to cover, please drop it down in the comments below, and have a great week making tunes, and I'll see you in the next video.